I want to ask you a question. Do you know who Amy Johnson is? Well, you may not know this, but Amy Johnson was the first woman to fly solo from England to Australia in 1930, 11,000 miles. Do you know who Alan Graham Bell is? Well, he invented the telephone. Do you know who Philo Farnsworth is? Well, he is meant to be the brainchild behind the television, whose patent, whose idea was bought out by Westinghouse. Last person, do you know who this person is? Do you know who Habakkuk is? Do you know who Habakkuk is? Well, hopefully within the next 4 weeks, you'll have a greater understanding who Habakkuk is, because Habakkuk is a book in the Bible. Now, some of you might think, I didn't even know there was a book in the Bible called Habakkuk. Well, a lot of people probably don't. Some people are probably even asking this morning, saying, well, is that in the Old Testament? Is it in the New Testament? How long is it? What's it all about? They're all good questions, and hopefully over the next 4 weeks, we can sort of answer some of those questions you might have about this 3-chapter book of the Bible that's tucked away there, that I think there's lots that we can actually learn from this book called Habakkuk. So I'd love you, while I start out, to try and find the book of Habakkuk in your Bible, or you can pull it up in your phone app, whatever it might work best for you to find the book of Habakkuk. But there's lots of stories and lots of aspects of this book that I believe will really encourage you, but challenge you as well as we work through this book, because I really believe it's really relevant, even really relevant as we find ourselves in the place that we are even this week. And I want to give you a little bit of an overview of the book of Habakkuk. And the first chapter, the first couple of chapters, the 2 chapters there, are a dialogue between Habakkuk and God. And it's a really honest discussion. And then the final chapter is a written prayer by Habakkuk that comes from this really honest discussion between him and God. And at the end of the book, Habakkuk concludes by expressing his ultimate faith in God. Even if he doesn't fully understand everything that is going on around him. I think it's one of the more remarkable sections of the whole Bible, because of this dialogue that we can read between Habakkuk and God. You don't read it anywhere else in the Bible that goes on to these type of lengths. We don't know a lot about Habakkuk personally. He's not mentioned anywhere else, especially there in the Old Testament. He identifies himself very early on as a prophet of God, where he spoke on behalf of God. He would tell people the words that God had given to him. He was a man who prophesied the future. But little is known about Habakkuk. Little is known about him, probably more than any other writer nearly of the whole Bible. But here's what some of the big ideas are of the book of Habakkuk, because Habakkuk pondered the state of his nation of Judah, and a lot of it really dumbfounded him. He couldn't believe what people were doing, the evil that was going on. Godly people actually were doing evil things. There was corruption going on. There was fighting. There was violence. There was ungodliness. Folks, again, this doesn't sound much different to the world in which you and I, we wake up to every day. So when people say the Bible's not relevant, I go, well, hang on for just a minute, because what we read about and what we listen to is even though it was many, many thousands of years ago, it's still happening today. The same issues, the same decisions, the same choices, and the same pains that caused God to this day were happening 2,000 years ago. Evil was thriving. But yet Habakkuk sees God as strangely silent. And that's what Habakkuk in this first chapter we see. He's asking God, how can you let this mess continue? You know, it reminds us that while God may seem silent and uninvolved in our world, he has a plan. He has a plan to deal with evil, and he always is working out what is just. Not on our time, but on his perfect time. So this book of the Old Testament, this 3-chapter book that not many people speak about, you might not have even heard it spoken about before, this book Habakkuk is a picture here of a prideful people being humbled, while those who seek a right life by faith in God. And Habakkuk asks God the kind of question that so many of us ask. Why, God? Do you force me as a follower of yours to have evil around me? Why do I have to look at evil? Why do I have to stare at it in the face day after day? Why do I have to be in a situation surrounded by people who make choices in the community in which I live and beyond, who make choices that are opposite to your ways? However, and it's really important that you keep this in mind. Write this down and it'll come up on the screen. Keep this in mind throughout the whole series. The book of Habakkuk reminds us that no place is too dark and no wall too thick for God's grace to penetrate in a powerful and life-affirming way. So that's the setting that we find for Habakkuk. Habakkuk wrote this book and he begins by raising questions that he has for God. And among the questions that Habakkuk raised are these. Is God in charge? If God is in charge, why do things happen the way they do? Why doesn't God seem fair? You know, in dealing with these questions, Habakkuk speaks directly to our times in light of today's world, our lives, what you and I face. You know, who hasn't asked over the last 24, 48 questions, type of questions like, why is this happening again? This doesn't seem fair. Why is it Victoria that's locked down? Why are you letting this happen, God? Maybe some of you have asked. And I'm not sure about you, but I like answers. I like answers to questions, and I like the answers to come pretty quickly. But they don't always come straight away, do they? So if you've got your Bibles there, I'd love you to open up to the chapter 1 there, and we're going to look at the first four verses today. It describes Habakkuk's complaint of the spiritual and the moral decay in the nation. Now, I want to say this about the sermons over the next 4 weeks. They're not going to be sermons that might always finish how we like them to finish. They're not going to be always so neat and tidy, because the book of Habakkuk's not all neat and tidy. And in fact, you might even find yourself going, well, come on, Tim, give us something a little more that's going to encourage us or is pleasing. Yet what I want to say to you is this resembles real life. There's tension, there's drama, and there are plenty of unanswered questions in this book. So it's worth keeping that in mind as we read the first 4 verses. The oracle, the meaning of an utterance, a doom, a burden, God's message that Habakkuk, the prophet received? How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore, the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. Nothing, God, is turning out fair. The wicked hem in the righteous, so the justice is perverted. Let me ask you a question. What frustrates you? What annoys you? I think all of us have some frustrations. Some of us have annoyances that we have. You know, I've got a few pet peeves. And one of them is this. Is driving along and seeing council workers doing a job and a high number of them standing around by one or two of them do the work. I came across this sign, this picture someone sent to me that gave me a little laugh. I hope it doesn't offend you if you're watching. But it highlights the fact that there's 11 supervisors hanging around. And you know, as you drive past these, council workers working, it's not uncommon to see lots of supervisors, numbers of people leaning on shovels, numbers of people standing around having a drink or having a smoke, and some of them lining up for the portaloo or whatever it might be, leaving one lonely guy to do the work. And I'm not sure about you, it's just one of those things that can frustrate me sometimes. Sometimes I want to just yell out of the window, come on fellas, I'm paying for this. This is my rates. I need all of you to be working. No one does my work for me. There's only just me. There's 11 of you, but only one of you is working. It doesn't seem fair. You know, for Habakkuk, things don't seem fair. And what they do is it causes a frustration. It annoys. And it's fair to say that Habakkuk is frustrated, that he is annoyed. I want you to try your best to put yourself in Habakkuk's shoes. Put yourself in his mind here for a second. He's seeing all this idolatry going on around him. People worshipping other gods, making evil choices, ignoring God. And he is a person of God. And you're begging God to do something about all that's going on, that's wrong, that's ungodly. And what's happening is it continues to unravel, and it seems as though God is not there. In fact, it seems like it's getting even worse. So put yourself in his shoes. That's what he's facing when we read what we just read. I sense I can totally agree with why he's questioning God. Why, God? Why in the world is this happening? What are you doing? How can you let this happen? This is wrong. Do something about it. Why are you letting people act like this? Aren't you just? Aren't you God? Aren't you doing something? Seems like you're idly sitting around. What's happening, God? That's why I think Habakkuk is a really important book for us. Because I sense all of us at some point have asked those type of questions of God. You know, on the road to Christian growth, there are times when these sort of things happens, where we do ask God questions, wondering why this is going on. Why are you allowing this to happen? Where are you, God? If you're paying attention to secular arguments against there being a loving God, this is one of the questions that comes up, and it's highlighted over and over again. If there is a loving God, an all-knowing and all-powerful God, why, explain to me, why does he allow terrorist attacks? Why does he allow children to be abused? Why does he allow atrocities to happen to the human race? Explain to me why he lets COVID happen and all the effects that come from that. This is a question that constantly gets thrown time and time again to people of faith in the living God. Maybe it has happened to you as it happens to me. God, why are you letting these things happen? Why? Why would a loving God allow that to happen? I'm not sure about you, but I can speak only on my behalf. But there are times that I ask myself and I come to God, I say, God, why are you allowing this to happen? I don't understand why. What I love about Habakkuk is this, is he is just honest. He's an honest man sharing his heart with God. I think numbers of us could actually relate to him. He's not playing games. He's not confused. He's frustrated, and he's actually bringing that before God. Sometimes as Christians, we actually might believe, some of you, that we should just read the happy psalms. We should just sing the happy songs. But Habakkuk comes to God and he highlights to us that it's okay actually to say to God, God, what are you doing? Are you listening? In my daily Bible readings in the last week, I've been reading about Job. You find Job also in the Old Testament. And this is the guy that God allowed for him to lose everything. Everything. All his family, livestock, just everything. The only thing that he said to Satan was, you cannot take his life. And this is what Job said in Job 21. He says, why do the wicked live on? Growing old and increasing in power. They see their children established around them, their offspring before their eyes. Their homes are safe and free from fear. The rod of God is not on them. Honesty with God is a good thing. Honesty done in the right way is allowed. I am so glad that I've discovered Habakkuk. I'm so glad that I've read these words in the Bible. How long, O God, shall I cry for help, and you will not listen? How long, God, will you allow this violence? Why do you make me see this wrongdoing? Why do you allow me to see this? This destruction and this violence around me. The law becomes slack and justice never prevails, God. How is it that you let me, your prophet, stand out here in a sense in the hot sun and yell my head off and you don't seem to be doing anything? Have you ever cried out to God? God, just do something. Anything. Correct whatever is going on out here. You know, some of us may believe that God's lounging around in heaven, deaf to our pleas. Because that's what Habakkuk, in a sense, as you listen to his words, thought. He was desperate. Here is what he's saying. The Babylonians have chipped away at this little kingdom of Judah until there was hardly anything left. God, this is your nation. This is the temple in the holy city of Jerusalem. You've promised to protect it. God, why aren't you acting? God, you hate wickedness. It may seem to you like it did to Habakkuk that God has abandoned you. And when I say that God has abandoned you, I'm not talking about the small and insignificant things. I'm talking about the real burdens that you have. And I sense that as I speak this morning here in the live stream, there are numbers of you that are listening this morning who are carrying heavy burdens. Burdens that weigh heavy on your heart. You just wonder, why do these keep happening? Why are they still so heavy for me? And you can actually begin to question. You can question, and I think these will come up on the screen where you think, God, you don't seem to care. You're not doing as much as you could. Couldn't you do so much more, God? God, if you could just do something, it would fix everything. God, it just doesn't seem fair. Doesn't seem fair. The way you seem to be going about it, God, doesn't seem right. You might be listening and thinking, well, is it okay? Is it appropriate to think like that and to ask those questions? I believe there are times to ask honest questions to God. To do it respectfully, it's okay. Remember, Habakkuk is a prophet of God, chosen. He loved God. And we read how he went about it, what he did. It can actually strengthen our faith journey. You know, if you read at least 1/3 of the Psalms, people are calling out in those Psalms and they're asking questions to God, calling out to him, saying things like, God, will you rescue me from the situation that I find myself in? You know, there's an Old Testament book called Lamentations, which is filled with cries and wailings and expressions of grief. It's important, we can take from this morning from Habakkuk, that it's important to take honest questions to God. It's important for our faith journey. You know, the name Habakkuk actually means one who embraces, one who wrestles. You know, when I was at school in the Philippines, it was an American school, and part of our PE lesson was doing wrestling, not WWE wrestling, but sort of Olympic style wrestling. It was weird. I found it odd. You know, even getting in the outfit you were meant to wear for wrestling was just odd in itself. But the idea was to try and pin someone down, and you would be trying all these different moves, trying anything that you can to get points to win and to cause this person to be pinned down. And it was the both of you going back and forth, wrestling away. You know, Habakkuk lives up to his name. He's honestly wrestling with God, going back and forth with God over what was going on. There's anguish, there's despair, and there's frustration going on. And he's wrestling with God that he might understand, God, what's going on in this place that I live, in this world that I live, in my community here, in my world. You know, it's King David. I think a lot of us can relate to this human perspective of what David says in Psalm 7:9 when he says, "Oh, righteous God, bring to an end the violence of the wicked and make the righteous secure." You know, I want to just highlight 3 little things here. You know, God, though, might well be reminding us that he is eternal and is not enslaved in our impatience. Now, we might not want to hear this, but I think it's worth hearing as we reflect back on Habakkuk and all his questions. God may well be reminding us that he is eternal, that he's not enslaved to our impatience. I'm an impatient person. I'm not always sure why God seems to be delaying his answers and the questions that I have for him, that I bring to him in my prayers. I want answers and I want them straight away. Mate, sometimes God is teaching sincerity to us. Are we really sincere in our faith? You know, the Greek word for sincere actually means to test by sunlight Maybe he's teaching us sincerity. You know, when you wash your windows and you can think you've really cleaned those windows well, but when the sun shines on them, you can all of a sudden start to see some streaks and smears. You know, it is when the test comes, when the challenges come to our faith, it's in those times that our faith is shown to be sincere or not. You know, thirdly, when it comes to us putting our honest questions to God, he may well be teaching us that he's sovereign, that he's in control. When we're out of control with our thoughts and our attitude, he works in his time, in his way. He's not influenced by our impatience or even what's going on in and around us. You know, it's Paul, the Apostle Paul, when he's writing to the church in Ephesus, he said he makes everything work out. Habakkuk, he makes everything work out. Tim, he makes everything work out according to his plan. As it says in 2 Peter, a day for God is like 1,000 years. A day is like 1,000 years. Fourthly, to help us to develop appreciation. We might not want to hear that, but to develop an appreciation for which we're seeking after. A fifth one is to strengthen our dependence and trust on him. Let's go back to Job just for a second. Job, he was described as a man who was blameless and upright. He feared God and he shunned evil. Despite all that was happening to him, he continued to appreciate the living God. You know, for Job, not every question that he had put to God was answered. But he continued to live holy and a righteous life. And his trust and his appreciation to God grew, even in the suffering and the situation that he found himself, even with the burdens that he had. You know, this is really challenging to do in the midst of our honest questions to God. You know, sixthly, the answer might be already given. God may have already given the answer, but we can't see it because maybe it's an answer that we did not want. You know, for some of us today, God seems silent. For some of us, maybe we're impatient with God. Maybe for some of us, we have questions and we keep calling them out, and that's okay, but we're frustrated. I want you to take hold of these words of Jesus because they encourage me in the midst of this. And as I reflect on Habakkuk, his questions, where he was at, and what Jesus said in John 13:7. He says, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later on you will understand. You know, the first 4 verses of chapter 1 are all about, in a sense, wondering. Wondering, where is God? Where is justice? Wondering in times when help is needed and why no help comes. The truth is this, that God is at work. God is at work at all times, according to his purposes, not Tim Dyer's, not Habakkuk's, not yours. But he's always at work, bringing order in the chaos. God's always at work, even when we might not be noticing it. But he's always at work, because what he does is he uses methods and ways that we don't fully understand or even understand at all. He's using his perfect methods. Here's the thing. God answered Habakkuk. He had a response ready for the prophet's questions and complaints. God told Habakkuk that there was a whole lot more going on than Habakkuk could see. So I want to encourage you to come back next week, hopefully face to face, but if not, we'll be streaming anyway, to hear God's answers. It's not what Habakkuk wanted to hear. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this small book in the Bible where it shows us that in appropriate ways we can come to you and we can ask those questions. but we're also reminded that you are eternal and that you're not enslaved by our impatience. These might be times even with the burdens that we're carrying, that it could be that you might be teaching someone even listening today that you are sovereign, that you're in control. That it may be a situation where we need to come and we need to even appreciate where we find ourselves quite possibly. Maybe it's to strengthen our dependence upon you and to trust you more. Maybe the answer's already been given and we're just not open to that answer. But may we know, God, through these 4 verses that we've read of Habakkuk this morning, that we know that you're open to our prayers and our questions for us to call out to you. So we thank you for that. And I pray that each person would know that this morning, that they can bring anything to you in prayer, that you're open to listen to them because you love them so very much, for they and that each of us are your children. So as we finish this morning, and I want to say thanks for being with us, I want to remind you of this benediction that again comes out of 2 Thessalonians 3:16 that says this, and it's a great reminder for us as we face what we do in these times, that may the Lord of peace himself give you his peace at all times and in every situation and circumstance you find yourself in. May the Lord be with you. Thanks for being with us this morning.